Good morning. This is an interview that's being conducted in Fairhope, Alabama for the Veterans History Project in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. My name is Louie Blaze, and it is May 10th, 2011. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Louie.
Your name is Doug Cazort?
Cazort.
Cazort. And it's awful good to have you, and we really appreciate you coming in and talking to us this morning. What is your date of birth, Doug?
December 21st, 1943.
December 30th, 1943. And where were you born?
El Dorado, Arkansas.
Dorado, Arkansas. What did your parents do?
My dad was, he worked for Exxon, but at that time he was in Germany with the 84th Infantry Division, along with Henry Kissinger. I'm just saying that Henry Kissinger, of course, was in headquarters. My dad was a sergeant in the infantry. When he came back, he got work with Exxon and continued to work with Exxon until, I think, 1994, something like that. Yeah. But lifelong, and then my mother was a housewife and mother and raised us. We were Exxon nomads. We lived in Iran for 6 years, from the time I was 12 to 18, and I lived there for 2 years and then would come back to boarding school in Mississippi, a little school called Chamberlain Hunt Academy in Port Gibson, just between Vicksburg and Natchez. And
your dad was in the service, right? Is that what you said? Yes.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any other siblings, brothers or sisters that might have served in the military?
No, my brother didn't. He was an asthmatic, wouldn't qualify. But I had a bunch of uncles in World War II. Two of them were pilots who were killed, and another one was a pilot who was not killed, who flew gliders into Bastogne and waited out the end of it there.
What were you doing just before you went in service?
I graduated from Vanderbilt in 1966, and I had a Rotary Foundation fellowship to go study German literature at the University of Basel, Switzerland. While I was over there, my girlfriend at Vanderbilt jilted me for another man, and who can blame her? And it really knocked me off balance. When I came back to the States, I really didn't know what I was going to do, and then I went down to the recruiting station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My dad was back in Baton Rouge there at the refinery. And I was thinking about, well, I've got German language. I'll check out the Air Force intelligence. Maybe I could get into that with my German language. And after I got in their brochures, I was walking down the hall, and this little Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who was in the Marine office, recruiter, he said, "Good afternoon, sir. Have you thought about giving us a shot?" And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll join the Marines, go to Vietnam, get killed, and that'll show her. Well, and I'd already been predisposed to the Marines because the military high school I went to had always had Marine Corps, former Marine commandants, and that military system was run on the Marines. So it was almost like when I got there, I'd had 4 years of Marines experience with just, everything except combat, of course. So I did, and it worked out a lot better. It's sort of like Marine Corps OCS has a way of jerking you back into reality and helping your perspective. And then I applied for Vietnamese language school in Monterey, California, and I actually got it. And spent 8 months there studying Vietnamese, and then went to Vietnam for a year. That takes me up to probably the next question.
You went in as an enlisted man and then went to OCS?
No, I went in as, since I already had a degree, I went in directly to OCS, got a commission, and then the Marine officers, all of them, whether they're going to be pilots or what, they have to go to an additional 6 months, 8 months training as infantry officers. And did that, and then I went to Vietnamese language.
Where'd you do that?
All of that's at Quantico, Virginia.
All at Quantico, Virginia? Okay. What was it like in California going to language school, Vietnamese language school?
Well, it was a dream. I mean, it was the language school itself is excellent. All the people, like, say they teach 40 different languages. All the teachers are native language speakers from those countries. So all of our teachers, we had 3 or 4 different Vietnamese people who, as much as possible, spoke Vietnamese to us all the time. And we had 6 hours a day of that, nice lunch. The Monterey, where the language school is the old Spanish Presidio, and then became, American Army head post. Beautiful country. The only thing that wasn't very good was the situation with the ladies, because that was, that was the height, starting from '68 on, of the anti-war movement. So any guy who had short hair wasn't going to meet a lot of young women. But I did all right.
I'm sure you did. Now, after you got out of language school and became, I guess, proficient in Vietnamese, did you go to Vietnam right after that?
Yeah.
And then what happened then?
Well, the military has a way of not capitalizing on schools you go to. So for 6 months, I was out in the mountains where there were no Vietnamese except ones you shot at. I had to take that back. We had a Vietnamese scout who was with us for a while that I got to talk all Vietnamese to. But I was a platoon commander in a regular, what we'd call a rifle company, meaning infantry, for 6 months. And then for the second 6 months, I lived with the Vietnamese and did get to speak.
I wonder if you could kind of go over the different regiments. I'm doing a little bit of research. I hear divisions, I hear platoons, I hear, how does that work? Starting at the smallest unit in a Marine, I would think would be maybe a squad.
A squad's cut down into a certain number of fire teams. At least it was then. They may have totally reorganized the thing now. But then, so you say you had 4 fire teams in a squad of 3 men each, or and then there are 3 squads in a platoon.
Okay.
And then 3 platoons in a company, 4 companies in a regiment, 3 regiments in a division. That's the way it was in the Marines in those days. So when you hear, if somebody says, I was in Delta 1-3 for 3 months, I was in Echo 2-7 for 3 months, and then I was Combined Action Company Commander for 6 months. It just means Delta 1-3 means Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, and then they don't mention the fact that the 3rd Marine Regiment's in the 3rd Marine Division. So 3rd Marine Division for 3 months, and then 1st Marine Division, and that's where the 7th Marine Regiment was.
They use these terms all the time, and I'm never sure how big of how many people they're actually talking about when they talk about a division or a regiment or a platoon.
Well, they're with 4 rifle companies in a regiment, plus a headquarters company, and I've forgotten all the other stuff like artillery and that sort of thing. There are probably, let's see, in a company, there are at least 200, 800. There's well over 1,000, maybe 2,000 men in a regiment.
Okay.
And then with 3 regiments, so you got about 6,000 to 8,000 men in a division, 10,000.
Tell us a little bit about what you did with the Vietnamese in these villages.
Okay. This combined action was something that was in I Corps. That's the northern 1st Corps from the DMZ down to below Da Nang. There were 4 different areas in which you had the combined action. I was up in the top one. And in each province, we were in Quang Tri province, there are a certain number of districts, and in 3 of those districts, the most heavily populated, you had a combined action company. Then each district was broken down into hamlets and villages, and what we would do was we put reinforced squad of Marines, and reinforced just means they had more mortars. Each one had the same equipment as a platoon, meaning about 3 times as much equipment, because they had their own mortars, their own machine guns, and their own Navy medical corpsman. Usually only a platoon gets that. And then they were put in a hamlet where there was a popular force platoon. Guys, Vietnamese who were from there, who had gone off for some rudimentary training, and then came back, kept on planting and harvesting rice and doing the things they would normally do. But then the Marines were there to help train them more, and actually to make sure that they actually ran patrols and especially did ambushes at night to keep Viet Cong or NVA from coming in from the west or from the north, and killing the village administrators, like village chief or whatever like that. And then we'd also do civic action, like I remember one of the squad leaders who took a lot of initiative, he asked for wooden ammo crates that they can make into school desks for the kids in the local school. And then the Navy medical corpsman would be training women, moms in the hamlet, in basic hygiene and first aid, stuff like that, and treating them, sort of like they're free medical while I was there.
Well, did the North Vietnamese infiltrate this area you were in?
They did. It was, in general, compared to, say, 1968, it was very quiet. But while I was company commander, our ambushes triggered several times when sometimes it would just be a squad of them who had come in to sort of escort a Viet Cong leader. And in one case, they actually managed to get in there, into one village, kill the village chief and get out, and eluded our ambushes. But in one case, one of our ambushes near the coast, because what they would do, the North Vietnamese had figured out that they could go down the beach, just trotting down the beach from North Vietnam, and elude, and in the sand dunes by the beach, keep a low profile and infiltrate during the night. And there was a company of North Vietnamese. Of course, the guys who triggered the ambush didn't know it was so many. They triggered the ambush. I was fortunately in Bangkok at the time on R&R, or unfortunately, however you look at it. So my gunnery sergeant, back at headquarters, they were always in radio contact, kept flare ships and gunships going around the whole time so that they weren't overrun by the North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese pulled back, who knows where they went to.
Did the American troops, American Marines, fight alongside the South Vietnamese?
Yeah, and like in that ambush, there would have been, say, 3 or 4 Marines, anywhere from a third to a half of the squad. The other half would be set up in the village houses. And there would be maybe 10 South Vietnamese.
Were South Vietnamese pretty good soldiers?
These guys were, if they were shot at, they would shoot back as long as the Marines were there. But they had, there was a hierarchy of soldiers from the lowest at the village level. Then there was a district level forces, regional forces, and then their main force units. And their main force units were by and large well-trained, good fighters. And it wasn't until the very end that they finally, lost morale, lost support, didn't have supplies, and crumbled, and it was all over.
Were you served actually in combat? Were you in any combat, any patrols?
I was, sure, but I mean, the whole time I was there, I was in a combat leading situation. But I lived a charmed life. I'll give you an example. One night, when we were up near the DMZ, we had to, each company had to move twice a day and set up different positions. And like, you'd set up on a hilltop at night and dig in, holes all the way, fighting holes all the way around, set machine guns and that sort of thing. And then after dark, send out ambushes so that you would catch any NVA coming either toward you or just through the area. Like one night, one of the ambushes triggered on an NVA soldier who was running along the trail, just running along. And they shot him, and they found out he had 2 sets of uniforms on. And so they wrote it up as one North Vietnamese soldier transporting uniforms. Just as a joke. But anyway, that one night, we had moved up on this ridge near Dong Ha Mountain, and I remember it was a beautiful moonlit night, and we sat in, and after I'd gone to sleep, everybody had to do watches, and I would have to get up every once in a while and make sure that all my watch guys were awake. And we heard, all of a sudden there was maybe 2 or 3 miles away on another hill, a lot of firing going on and explosions and stuff, and I heard the company radio man who stayed on the net, and he could hear all the other companies saying, Charlie Company's really catching it. So the next day we found out that the company commander had been killed, one of the platoon commanders was killed, and the company commander's radio man was killed. And what had happened was we had to move twice because the North Vietnamese would never attack you unless they had a chance to really see your position and rehearse. So by just going to one place at night, breaking camp in the morning, going to a day position, sending out patrol, and then as close to dark as possible, we would have already psyched out the next place we were going to by sending out those patrols. We would break that camp and go and set in on that camp, dig new holes, and fire up some sea rations, and then spend the night. Well, because of a storm we had, Charlie Company had not got its resupply, and so they decided to stay in one position one more night so that resupply could come to them. Well, it did, but that gave the North Vietnamese a chance to set up an attack, and it was done by what they call their sappers, I don't know, just regular MBA, who would be stripped down to their shorts so that their clothes wouldn't snag on anything. And they would have like satchel charges, like a backpack full of dynamite or explosives or C4 or whatever. And they would spend hours crawling in to make sure it was quiet. And then their attack would be announced by someone with a rocket-propelled grenade, which you're always seeing in pictures of, like Iraq or Afghanistan. They're still using those rocket-propelled grenades, and they did it to great effect. So they would, they fired, they knew where this Lieutenant Hammerbeck was, and they fired at his position. So there was a big explosion. Then they started running through, throwing satchel charges into people's holes and that sort of thing. And when the lieutenant's radio man said, well, anyway, I'm getting in real depth, but I don't need to get into it, about somebody else's. Well, I was just 2 miles away. Same thing when I was wounded. We were actually, the company commander and I were actually psyching out a place near a village. It was in a valley where some of the resettled people, Vietnamese, had come back in and were farming. And we were trying to keep the rice away from the Vietnamese, from the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. And we walked through this opening in a hedgerow, and someone had put a booby trap in there, artillery shell, one of our artillery shell duds, and then they set it up with very simplified thing, probably one of our radio batteries, some strips of metal from a Czechoslovakian sardine can, and it's set so that when you stepped on it, it made a contact between the battery and the fuse of that shell. Well, luckily they had buried a little too deep, and so when it erupted, I didn't step on it. The man behind me, the company commander, did, and it just threw us both with dirt and everything about 15 feet. And then he caught a bunch of shrapnel, but he didn't die. And I had a concussion and some scratches, but that's what I mean about being always in a combat position always out there, but really a charmed life.
Is that the incident for which you received the Purple Heart?
Well, I received a Purple Heart with Combat V, and what that means is it's not for a specific incident. It's sort of like, well, good. You know, you did well. You were always there. You always had your men out. You blah, 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 blah. And you were wounded. You were in a combat situation. So, yeah.
Was the terrain where you were, is it pretty typical of what we see, Vietnam, jungles and
Both.
thick?
Jungles and then the rice paddies. But
Okay.
rarely did you ever have it together unless you were right on the borderline of the mountain chain, because that mountain chain runs from China down through North Vietnam, South Vietnam. And then there's a rice plain all the way up and down too. So for the first 6 months, yes, jungle. It's not as exotic as what you see in the movies. You know, it's like, there are times where you could just be, say in hill country in North Alabama or something, a real thick country. And then there's what they call the high canopy, where the foliage is so dense that down below it's fairly clear. You can just zoom right on through.
It's kind of the image I had of Vietnam, this
The high
almost lush,
canopy?
tropical. Nice
Well-
place to visit if somebody wouldn't shoot at you, you know.
Yeah, well, a lot of my friends have gone back and visited since then. I never had that much desire to do that.
I can understand that. Were you in Vietnam when the big pullout occurred?
Well, that's when it started in fall of 1969, and Nixon said, "I'm pulling out the 3rd Marine Division." And what they did was they took everybody from the 3rd Marine Division, the 1st Marine Division, and the Air Wing. And if you had 10 months in country already, you became in the 3rd Marine Division. If you had less than 10 months, and I only had 3 months at the time, you got transferred from 3rd down to 1st Marine Division. And in a way, he wasn't lying about it, because those men were not going to be replaced. I mean, they were only going to replace the people who were finishing up their tour in 1st Marine Division. So that's when it started. And then I guess our last people went out, 72 or 73, and then the whole thing collapsed in 75.
You were already out by then, though, right?
Long out.
Long gone.
Yeah.
What experiences that you encountered or in the military that I understand you wrote some books, you authored several books. Anything that you took with you that influenced your post-Vietnam years? Did you just go home and forget about it? Says, never phase in my life, I'm not going to even think about the other.
Well, pretty much I went home and forgot about it, but after I got married and had a son, the sort of stresses of that got me to be interested in the Vietnam Veteran Outreach Program. And I went into that for a while. And
What is that?
it was something the VA started because Vietnam veterans were not coming. A lot of them were mistrustful of the government, and this is the story that started it, because it turns out later that some of those guys were not Vietnam veterans.
Oh,
Some of the most vocal ones. There's a really good book called Stolen Valor by a guy named Bernard Burkett, and it's really a pretty entertaining read because there's this sort of sardonic humor in the whole thing, about these superheroes who, you know, he gives all their heroic stuff, and they say, however, it turns out, you know, and he exposed more than 200 in the book, one of whom had managed to fake himself up with a Congressional Medal of Honor. And he also found out during that time that Vietnam wasn't the only time that happened. Anyway, the Vietnam Veteran Outreach Program. Since Vietnam veterans were supposedly, not trusting enough to come in and get help, they started these storefront things where they would have a couple of counselors, almost always Vietnam veterans themselves, who would counsel Vietnam veterans, tell them how to get medical help, whatever they needed, and try to get them back to a point where they would maybe go to school and get a college degree and that sort of thing. And I sat in on one of those for several months. Just about died from secondhand smoke, 'cause that was in the days where you could smoke anywhere.
Where was this?
It was in San Diego,
In San Diego,
California.
okay.
And I was in graduate school at San Diego State at the time. So but you know, it's funny. I have friends from the Marines, and there's these emails that they send, and their buddies send, people that they know and knew in Vietnam. And it's this constant thing, refighting that war. And they'll have some guy like, there's a guy named Hershenson, and he's going around saying we were betrayed by the Congress when they cut off. They didn't follow up on the agreements that we had made with the North and South Vietnamese after that war to keep resupplying the South Vietnamese. They cut off funding. And he's just in an interview like this, but it occurred to me, well, if Congress cut it off, they may have just been mirroring the desires of the American people. And whether you agree with that or not, it's just a matter of this is a democracy, and the American people were pretty much fed up with it. There was an organization called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Once again, some of those were not Vietnam veterans, but in the main, they were, and they wanted to see us end our involvement in Vietnam because they didn't think it was worth the death. So I have left it behind, and I don't get involved. The only time I get involved with these emails is when they'll send an email around that's so outrageous. I go on Fact Check or PolitiFact or something like that and check it out. And so far, I'm running about 95% of all those really outrageous emails are lies.
I had no idea that was still going on.
Like the one about, I bet you've seen this one, about Jane Fonda visiting North Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she did, and she was taken, and she's apologized, and she apologized repeatedly. This is not about Jane Fonda. It's about someone that hates her so much that they will fabricate these lies, and they said that when she was taken to visit the POWs in Hanoi, each POW had a little rolled up piece of paper in which they wrote a little message to the world. And as she shook their hands, each one passed it on to her. And then when she got to the end of the line, she gave them all to their North Vietnamese guy. You've read that?
I've seen that one, yes.
All right. So as a result, they beat these guys up. One of them died from the beating. Well, there's a follow-up email to that by the guy who died from the beating. He says, I don't know where this came from. I don't know who's doing this. And you can check it out on Fact Check and all those. Everything except the fact she was there, everything in that email is a lie. Now, I will check those out and send it back to my buddies and say, what do you think? And they're pretty much silent. One of them will come back and say, boy, that's amazing, but they don't want to hear that. They just want to keep doing this thing about refighting Vietnam, and
It was that type of conflict, though, wasn't it?
It was, and it'll stay alive, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, one last question. How'd you happen to end up in Fairhope, Alabama?
Once again, good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah. The last place my wife and I both taught was at a big private high school and prep school in Orlando. And we had been in Oregon for 8 years, and as I drove down, I stopped off. A friend of mine from Pine Bluff said, you ought to go by and see my son in Fairhope. And his son was George Talbot, who is the political editor for the News Register.
Okay.
And we stopped, saw George, and then several months later came back to his wedding and stayed at the Grand. They had their reception at the Grand, had their wedding at the Presbyterian Church, and fell in love with Fairhope, and that was 2001, and we started coming back, just checking it out. When we decided we're going to retire, thought, let's go up there and buy a lot and build a house. Is our sort of big retirement project. So we came here in the summer of 2008. So in June, it'll be 3 years that we've been here. And we bought a lot. And my wife's a person who meets a lot of people and joined everything she could so she would meet a lot of people. And as a result, we have, I don't know, it seems like to me, Janice included, we've met more nice people per capita in Fairhope than ever before in our life. Just a lot of good people.
Good. Well, Doug, it's awful good for you to come in and relate your stories and your experiences over in Vietnam. I know it's a very controversial subject, and appreciate your candid thoughts and some of your candid statements, and we're looking forward to having you here in Fairhope with us for many, many, many years.
Listen, where else would I get a captive audience for this long? I have to listen to my old story.
And we love it.
Could you talk a little bit more about living with the Vietnamese, or when you're embedded with
Okay.
Just add a little bit more, that would be great.
All right. I lived, or spent the nights anyway, at a Vietnamese district headquarters that was out in those sandy dunes between Route 1, which runs north-south the whole length of Vietnam, and the ocean. That street, that road is called the Street Without Joy. I don't know if you ever heard that called that. There's a book by Bernard Fall, a French writer who was later killed in Vietnam, about the French call it La Rue Sans Joie, the Street Without Joy. I would live in the headquarters, and I had a headquarters unit, a couple of radio men, a cook, because we had a little cook shack there. We could eat hot meals there, and a gunnery sergeant, a supply driver, because we would go into the main base, pick up a truck of supplies, bring it back out there, and then drive it out to the individual troops. Although, I mean, yeah, they had sea rations, but a lot of them were eating the local Vietnamese stuff too. They liked it. So the main thing they wanted was Tabasco sauce from New Iberia, Louisiana, which we got. McElhaney supplied us. They were supposed to patrol, do civic action work and all that sort of thing every day, and I was supposed to be out there with as many as I could spend some meaningful time with every day. And then at least 2 nights a week I was supposed to actually be on ambushes with them, that was the thing I didn't like about it, was that I slept on clean sheets and had a hot breakfast every morning, hot meal at night on the nights I was there. Whereas when I was with the infantry, with the infantry in the mountains, everything that the men did, I did. From digging my own hole, cooking my own sea rations. And that made it feel the relationship with my Marines in the villages feel a little artificial, because I never could get over that feeling of that. But that's what I would do. So I would be out on an ambush. And also, I didn't run those ambushes. I was just sort of along for the ride to let them know that, I'm here, and I'm willing to do the same things you do, but I know that you guys have got to be. So what I would do to sort of make up for it was every 2 weeks, I would take half the Marines from all 6 villages, pick them up in a big 6-by, and from the base, I would get frozen steaks and lobsters, and we would go out to the South China Sea, and it wasn't like China Beach. The beaches are beautiful, but in the sand dunes, we'd put up some Marines, and they would trade off security, and then they'd play football, swim, eat steak.
Every other week you say you do this?
Every other week I'd take half of them.
Oh, okay.
So this Saturday I would take half, yeah, and then one, and then another. Toward the end, I made sure I did that, and of course the Marines would get all bearded up, but when we took them back to the villages, there would be half of those Marines were sober to make sure that everything would be okay that night. And that was a lot of fun, and they really appreciated that.
Imagine.
Yeah. And that was some bonding times.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your interest.